Hello, Happy New Year! This is the first episode of 2021 of Navigating Adulthood and IDD. Thank you so much for listening. Today we're going to do our second annual podcast recap and recap some of the highlights and all of the guests of 2021. It was a lot of fun going back through these episodes and hearing all the expertise again, hearing all the conversations where I connected with everybody, and they really just shared so much knowledge this last year that I'm excited to highlight and hope that you'll go back and check out some of the episodes that pop out to you in this listen. So if this is your first episode, this is a great one. You might hear different topics or different speakers that you're interested in going and checking out after you're done with this episode. So in 2021, really three main areas of topics kind of came up that I grouped everybody under, and that was creativity and the aspect of being creative in our practice, as well as using creative and innovative modalities of service and of therapy for our adults with IDD and other disabilities, and as well as children too. And the second category was accessibility, which is a big topic on this podcast in general. So it came up a lot, and it came up in conversations with music therapists, with professionals working with employment with adults with IDD, with yoga instructors. So really all over the place, really good accessibility came up a lot. And the final topic is supervision, which we left 2021 with a conversation with Kate Shannon, where we discussed supervision and kind of started a very mini series. There'll be one more episode in this series coming out next month or later in February, perhaps, depending on the release. So those are our three topics that we're going to cover. So I'm going to let them play in order, but first up, we're going to hear about accessibility from Kathleen in episode 11, Danny in episode 13, Jenna and Lauren in episode 17, and Alyssa in episode 14.
I think the connection of yoga and mental health in this space that we work in, to me, that aligns a lot with the principles of yoga and what we do in making things accessible, and even if it's just breathing or moving, self-care, yoga goes beyond the mat. And that's where I really dive deep into my practice with even, a lot of people that I work with, is that emphasis on, I feel like, all the props in the world that you need in learning your body. And how do you take yoga off the mat? How do you continue these principles or these things to make you a stronger person, you a better person, to meet your needs? There's a lot, like you're saying, there's a lot of focus on, we have to look a certain way and we have to work out to be all these things. And it's like, at the end of the day, what is that doing for you? What is that doing for your mental health?
So we started looking at it and saying, and we've done this since our very beginning, never more than 6 kids. We always have at least 2 professionals in the classroom, sometimes 3. So we found like the 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio works very well. And then we set up the classroom where the kids are successful as well. We find that, if we set it up from the get-go, I want to say correctly, but with a greater outcome and greater chance of success, then the kids are more successful, right? I can't imagine, there are, the idea of trade schools is not original. There's other trade schools in town. But, for example, one of them, I know for a fact their auto program has 60 kids per class with one teacher. That terrifies me to think of, just personally, as a individual and educator, being with 60 kids. How is that even possible? Even if you had 6 hours and, can somehow keep them engaged that long, you have minutes with every,
right.
Nobody is getting the formal education they need. And no wonder that employers then go to those programs to hire, and those people get hired and the employer's they don't know anything. And it's well, how could you expect them to know anything in an environment like that? Nobody learns from that. So we're trying to set it up where there's the most contact time, the most individualized and differentiated time for every client.
One of the biggest accessibility barriers that we're realizing begins at a systemic level. The first step is identifying and understanding what these systemic barriers are, starting from the very first step of involvement. So there are so many people that could benefit from this program that don't even know that it exists. So problem solving and working together with diverse communities and partners to understand and further expand on making these resources more accessible for everybody just from that beginning stage. Another thing is financial accessibility. So having the understanding of different Medicaid waivers, funding options, scholarships, and ensuring that everybody is aware and educated on these different options to access not only our program, but alternative lifelong programming as well. We try our hardest to understand what these barriers are, then problem solve how we can take action to remove them while collaboratively creating a growth plan and implementing necessary supports and accommodations moving forward, which is extremely individualized and intentionally so. We will continue to pour into and educate ourselves in order to offer more justice forward, equitable, and impactful experiences, and hope that the communities that we reach will do the same as well. And then once we get to the point in the process of preparing for our overnight trips, we look at the different physical accessibility barriers. So we're really looking at from point A to point B to point Z, how we're getting to the airport once we're at the airport, like running through basically every scenario possible through the travel excursion with. It's kind of a curveball. I feel like everyone knows when you travel, nothing really goes exactly as planned. So you try and prepare for the unexpected, but we'll kind of go through each step of the travel process and we'll kind of discuss as a team. And when I say a team, that's like our volunteers, our staff, our travelers, our team of everyone that's going on this trip, going through those steps to make sure that everything is as accessible as possible. And if it's not, then we kind of have a discussion of how can we make it accessible and how can we teach, if it's an activity or, hopping on a bus or transportation, like how can we make sure that this can be accessible in the future for others as well? And really having a collaborative effort with those involved in those obstacles is huge. And of course, like I said, nothing really goes as planned. So there's a lot of on the fly and getting creative, but the goal is that each opportunity is as accessible as possible. And if it's not, we're ensuring that we're kind of getting loud and making it apparent that it is not, and making sure that there are steps in place for future travelers to have that opportunity and ensure that it is accessible in the future.
I would just say people just join us. We always have a good time, no matter what. If you're afraid of the first time, we'll cheer you up after a while. Just get used to us. We're not afraid. But it's just fun to be on the traveling domes instead of with your family or your providers, But it feels good to be with your friends that you haven't seen for a while. So I would recommend to come and join.
So neuroaffirming, I think the best way to define it, there's not one definition of it, but really respecting the personhood of the neurodivergent individual in front of you. So that could be developmental disabilities, could be developmental differences, autism, ADHD, twice exceptional. Neurodivergencies kind of fit a large category. Mostly they're referring to brain differences, neural differences. Neuroaffirming techniques are just saying there's nothing quote unquote, because you can't see my fingers, wrong with you. We're not trying to quote unquote treat you. We're trying to support you in your goals and help you reach your fullest potential on your terms. So we're affirming your neural differences, and we're not trying to change or shape you into one specific box. We're just trying to help your box kind of fit in with all the other boxes, if that makes sense. I'm not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I'm trying to make everything else a little rounder for you too, while helping you fit wherever you want to fit. So that's kind of the basis of of neuroaffirming, neuroinclusive, just being mindful that every person's different and we're not necessarily treating them, we're supporting them while respecting their neural differences and their neurodivergencies.
Next, we're going to hear about creativity from different professionals and how they use it in their practice, or how they use different creative modalities such as yoga and mindfulness and mudras and primitive reflex in their practices. So you're going to hear from Gabby in episode 12, Amanda in episode 15, Joanna in episode 19, and Christine in episode 20.
You don't have to release it. That's like, you don't.
That's true.
Yeah, you can just write. That's part of the reason why I created the journal. Is like, it's called space because it's space for you to write in. So
Right.
you can share that space if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. And I feel like the more we do the musical things or experiences that we're bringing to session, like it's only going to benefit because of your experience when you're bringing it into the therapeutic space.
And I think there's equal pressure for those of us like myself who've been in the field 20 plus years, right? We are seen as, by many people, as the more experienced, and we should have all the right clinical answers and not make mistakes and those types of things. And that's just simply not true. And one of the ways that a person in my stage of career, I think, I look at design thinking and I think to myself, I've been doing this. Like when I first heard the podcast, Bonnie, I thought to myself, I've been doing this all along. I just didn't have a framework. I didn't know the term design thinking, but I knew that my strengths aligned towards some of the steps. I don't want to call them steps because design thinking is not at all a hierarchy. That's one of the points that they make about it. But there are stages. And you shift between the stages, right? So there's empathizing, which I mentioned earlier, let's define what our problem is. And then there's ideating, thinking about it, brainstorming, coming up with ideas, and prototyping, which is basically experimenting, being spontaneous. And then testing. Testing for us as clinicians would be, we're going to act on what we've come up with our client. And sometimes those things all happen together. That brainstorming, experimenting, and testing, that all kind of happens, say, in one fell swoop. And other times it might happen more categorically. But the stages are designed, I guess the point I'm trying to make is all of those stages might not be intuitive for all of us, but there are some that are going to be maybe easier for others. If you're more of an introvert and a thinker, that whole concept of ideating and defining might be your wheelhouse. If you're more comfortable with doing and just being spontaneous and experimenting, which is my wheelhouse. That is what I realized when I first listened to the podcast. I thought, I've always done that. And I think that my lack of fear of making mistakes and being willing to be spontaneous and experiment has probably helped keep me from feeling really burned out.
Now, inhibiting the primitive reflex isn't going to solve all the problems, but what it's going to do is allow that barrier and that blocker to be gone. And I'll give you a great example. So with that palmar grasp reflex, and one of the potential symptoms for the reflex not going away is messy handwriting, because a child holds a pen or pencil funny or doesn't have control of the pen or pencil because it tickles their hand. So I can get rid of the reflex so that the reflex goes away and they can hold a pen or pencil however they want to. Now there's going to be a habit of holding it the old way, and it's not going to fix the handwriting. So I had a 16-year-old boy that I worked with, and he wanted to improve his handwriting. So we were doing the exercises to get rid of the primitive reflex, and that worked fine. The reflex went away, but he had to also practice. I gave him a white marker board to practice his handwriting. Now I don't know if he actually did that or not. It was sort of a homework and I didn't really check it because it was sort of out of my scope of what I do. But after the program, he told me, He lived with his grandmother, and his grandmother was hoping to get him some of these independent life skills. And that was one of her goals for him. But he told me that she made him go to a birthday party that he did not want to go to. It was a family party. And of course he got gifts and he just didn't want to go, but he went. And after the party, Grandma had him write out thank you notes for the gifts that he received. And he told me, Joanna, that was the first time in my life on a blank card that I wrote in a straight line across the card. Wow.
Right.
I never worked on that with him.
Right.
I didn't do that. I didn't focus on that. But he was able to do that because of the reflex being integrated.
Right.
So it's like that with all of those reflexes. It's not necessarily going to provide the end result. There's going to be work in between to get toward independence. But when you're out of fight or flight, or when you're able to cross the midline with your eyes for the first time in your life, it's going to make a huge difference in how you're able to present yourself, control your body, and your perception of the world changes. So that can lead to more independence.
Satanama is actually an ancient actual mudra practice, and it's called Kirtan Kriya. And we go really into depth in the book about that, and a lot of research, as well as understanding it from the yoga lens as well, and how it is so beneficial, therapeutic, and transformative, truly. One of the research results shows, and I think they've repeated it, that it increases the length of the telomeres, so which are the end caps on your DNA. And so it literally changes your DNA, which is incredible. And I think that's why so many of my students request Satanama. They can really feel it. I think as adults, we take a little bit longer to feel the mudra effects, where when I work with kids and even like adults with developmental disabilities, I can see immediate kind of calming, balancing, that parasympathetic activation really setting in. Now, not all mudras are relaxing and things. We want to use them in a balancing way and for the individual in front of us. But Satanama is one of those that will quite always balance, no matter if you have high or low energy. It's really powerful. And it's musical, so it uses chanting or singing. And there's also a visualization that goes with it, but I never teach that until students are very familiar with it. And then the hand sequence. So I don't know if you want to like link a couple of your videos down, but I love what you've done too to make it even more accessible or motivating for students that may not just want to sing it, because a lot of my students don't open their mouth at all the whole time. They don't want to sing. So sometimes we'll talk it out, which is just fine, or they just do the hand movements. But with the rock and the country beat, it's so motivating and adds that extra layer of motivation. And I can talk, there's so much to it, but I do have the one video that goes over exactly what Satanama is and the research too. So I kind of feel like if people want to learn more, they can go to those videos and also buy the ebook, because there's some stuff in the ebook that aren't in the videos and vice versa. But right. That really is a true yoga practice that is extremely therapeutic. And then adding the beats that you made for individualized use is really cool.
Finally, we'll hear about supervision from me and Kate. And there's so many online communities right now. I'm in the Music for Kiddos community, as well as the Creative Therapy Umbrella community. And these have been monumental in my development as a professional, as well as helped give me a sense of community that I really needed as a new professional too, because that leads to burnout too, is like not only that lack of supervision, but sometimes lack of community, depending on our jobs and where we end up getting our first couple jobs. And so I thankfully found these communities and even Facebook groups that are free, and started connecting with music therapists. This was before even the pandemic, so then the pandemic hit and we were all online, and so these communities expanded even more. And I feel like this peer supervision piece is possibly an accessible point for new professionals who are looking for supervision but maybe can't afford a supervisor or don't have one at work, or have one at work that's not a good fit, you could possibly seek peer supervision, both in forms where you have to invest, but I do believe, and I did find many accessible, affordable options as well. Facebook groups. Kim Best has an awesome Patreon group, I'll link below, that's really affordable, and she has a heart for new professionals too.
Ooh, for supervisors. Get your own supervision. I think as being a supervisor, and I think even if you can, get your own supervision about supervision to get real meta, like growing as a supervisor, we can always grow as a supervisor and always learn more. And maybe that's like doing continuing education or, learning new approaches or just expanding our knowledge is always helpful. But I think also just sometimes having that one-on-one experience as a supervisee is always so good to keep us humble and keep us really on our toes as well. I think this happens more in music therapy than in counseling, because in counseling, supervision is so different. It's kind of built into the supervision or clinical world very differently. But I think in music therapy, sometimes we can get really far away from what it feels like to be a supervisee, or what it feels like to be an intern, or what it feels like to be a practicum student. And, we can't go back and be an intern and a practicum student, but we can be a supervisee. And so I think being in that position can really keep us having fresh eyes of what it's like to work on your own stuff, what it's like to feel imposter syndrome, what it's like to, have a really tough case on something and, bring it in. And so, yeah, I think that's always, it's kind of that similar thing. I think of as a therapist, getting your own therapy is really important if you're asking people to do all these things, but you've never done it yourself. It's I think of the analogy of it's kind of like being a musician without ever picking up any instruments, right. You can't, you've got to have that, you've got to put yourself out there and put yourself in the same seat and experience what it's like as well. And that's going to make you that much better as a professional, a supervisor, whatever it is.
Thank you so much for listening to these highlights from 2021. I hope that it reminded you of an episode you enjoyed or brought up something new to think about or to explore more. Please check out all these episodes for their show notes, which are filled with so many good resources, as well as more expansions on these highlighted clips are available in their episodes as well. So go back and listen to anything that was interesting. Otherwise, stay tuned for episodes in 2022 and more conversations to continue and more resources to be gathered to support professionals who are working with and want to support and celebrate disabled adults. So if you're interested in being on the podcast, whether you are a professional and or disabled individual, please email me at bonnie@rhythmicrootsmusictherapy.org. If you like this episode, please follow the podcast on whatever podcasting host that you prefer, and share this episode or one of your favorite episodes with someone you think would like it. And please rate us on iTunes and Spotify if you would like. Your support is always so appreciated. And if you're looking to support the podcast more and for more music therapy resources for working with adults with IDD, consider joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/navigating adulthood and IDD. It's $5 a month. We have monthly meetings, a Facebook group, and on Patreon, I post monthly music therapy session plans geared towards groups and individual work to continue giving activity and intervention ideas for the busy music therapist who is looking for some more inspiration and connection with their peers. Thank you so much again for listening. I'll catch you in the next one. This podcast is by Rhythmic Roots Music Services, LLC, with content and music produced by Bonnie Haupt. Thanks for listening.